Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by the Time We Discuss studio. Today I'm speaking with Jared, and it's time we discuss teaching at the Lexington School and Center for the Deaf. Jared, thank you so much for joining me today on Time We Discuss.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Jared, I can't remember if I mentioned this on a previous video or not, but when it comes to inclusivity and people with disabilities, I have very, very strong positive opinions. Way back, I was a web developer, and we brought in someone who was blind, and we got to see them go through our web applications using a screen reader. And for me as a developer, that was just a huge, no pun intended, eye-opening experience for me. Just watching how they can navigate something that other people take for granted. So I have very strong opinions when it comes to knocking down barriers for people with any limitations. Now, for you as an educator of the deaf, you're working in a world where people probably don't even think about it if it doesn't directly affect them. What's it like being an educator for people that are deaf?
Same as being an educator for anyone, really. The only difference is that we work in a different language, basically. We work in American Sign Language, or ASL, as most people refer to it.
When it comes to sign language, is there like certifications that you have to take? Do you have to take so many years of studying it? How does that work?
When you're going for your degree in deaf education, for example, I went for my master's in deaf education, and I had to go through all the educational classes. And then on top of that, you have your ASL classes to check your proficiency levels. Basically, you don't want to go into a school and not know how to communicate with your students, with your colleagues, or even with parents. There's not a certification specifically in the language itself. It's a certification in education.
One of the neat things I've really liked about having these conversations is I get to see how much I don't know, and that's awesome. I love learning this sort of thing. So when it comes to teaching, is in your area of expertise, is it broken out through like elementary ed, middle school, secondary, or not so much?
It is. My specialization is deaf education K through 12. So I do have the full gamut. But at the same time, my specific degree is also in special education or general education actually for K through 6. So I have both, but the specialization is K through 12. So it's the whole, I could teach anywhere in my school.
Now, when you first started teaching, is this what you wanted to go to school for, or is this something that kind of found you later?
How much time do you have for this? So originally, I went to school for elementary education and psychology. And I went to a school in New Jersey, and I was there for 2 years. I was there for a semester before I realized that's not what I want to do at all. And I switched over to English and theater, two of the most lucrative, secure degrees that one could have, and then switched schools. And for many years, I was an actor. I was a performer. It's why I moved to New York. I performed a number of different shows here in New York, through other different states. And as I approached 30, I'm somewhat older than 30 now, I was sitting with a friend, and we were discussing basically what we were coming up with as our 30 by 30 list, 30 things we wanted to do before we were 30. And I knew the top thing I wanted to do, the only thing on my list really, was to learn American Sign Language. I had always been fascinated with it. I think having a dance background lends itself to a kinesthetic mode of communication. And so we were talking, and I had kind of realized that maybe I didn't want to do theater as my career for the rest of my life. So I started to go back to my first love, which was teaching. I had done a little bit of teaching, and so my friend said to me, "Why don't you go into deaf education? Because then you get to sort of mix the two." And I thought it was a great idea. So I went back to school and got my graduate degree in deaf education and started working at the school where I am now, Lexington School for the Deaf, and I've been there ever since.
As far as you know, do you need a master's degree to teach what you teach, or is there like an undergrad degree, or do you have an idea how that works?
I'm trying to think if there are any teachers at my school that I know their certifications or I know their degrees. I know one who has a PhD. Beyond that, I believe most have masters these days. I don't know what the requirements are, again, state to state, school to school, what they're looking for as far as teachers are concerned. I think having a little bit more education helps, but there's nothing to compare with real life experience.
Now, one of the neat things that I've noticed in the past several years, at least, is a lot of times when there's any kind of public event, they have someone there signing as well or interpreting. Do people do that and only that as their profession, or is it more of someone like you that also, you know, hey, I'm available, I can do this? Do you know how that works?
There are professional interpreters. I happen to be one as well as being an educator. Educators for the deaf are not interpreters. And just because you can sign doesn't mean you can interpret. They are different skills, and it is a common misconception that anybody who can sign can interpret. They're not the same thing. I ended up
Elaborate on that for me. How does that work?
Sure. So I actually ended up going back to school a couple of years ago to become a sign language English interpreter. And I say, ASL English, because we don't just interpret for the deaf, we interpret for the hearing. If you were able to sign, you wouldn't need the interpreter, right? It's that hearing people can learn to sign, deaf people can't learn to hear. So there's that, that misconception that, oh, well, we have to put you there because of deaf people. Well, we're there for you too. So any kind of event that would like to have a wider audience and would like to be accessible should be offering interpreters. They should be hiring interpreters. It's a little bit of field of dreams. Like if you build it, they will come. If you let people know that there is accessibility, they'll go. It tends to happen the opposite way from my experience. Again, I'm speaking as a hearing person. I want to make that very clear. I am not speaking for the deaf here, for the deaf community. But the idea that, oh, we don't have to provide interpreters because no deaf people are coming. Well, deaf people aren't coming probably because you're not providing access, right? So being an interpreter, doing that job, in addition to my job, has been incredibly rewarding, and I think has benefited me as a teacher because it helps me approach the way I teach differently as well. Thinking about accessibility, especially as the theater director for our school this past year, thinking about, we've never had captions, we've never had X, Y, and Z, and being able to provide all those different areas of accessibility is rewarding, but also just kind of the basic level, right? Like everybody should be able to enjoy whatever event it is with whatever they need. And I know that costs money and it takes time, but it makes all the difference.
I agree. And there was one thing that I used to say when it comes to accessibility for the web, it's like, the organization that I'm with, it's not only we're legally bound to do it, but it's also the morally right thing to do. And that's the one thing that I like to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're changing somebody who could not access this now gets to access it. It's like teaching. You get to change at least one life. They wouldn't have gotten to see it. They wouldn't have gotten to experience it. They wouldn't have gotten to whatever mode they access this incredible thing. They get to do that, just like we get to do that.
Now, if someone wanted to become an interpreter, do you know what the pathway to that is? Is that a similar educational path? Do you know what that looks like?
Yes, that one I have a little more experience with. There are multiple pathways to becoming an interpreter. It also depends on if you're looking to become a certified interpreter versus not a certified interpreter. And it depends also if you are hearing, hard of hearing, or deaf. There are some different pathways that you can take. I happen to go through what's called an interpreter educational program, an IEP, or some people call it a training program, ITP. It has since steered away from that to IEP. And it was pretty much equivalent with my master's. It's rigorous training. It's working on the various decision-making that happens while you're interpreting, trying to hold this in your brain and go, okay, that's happening. How do I change this to be that so that you get the equivalent experience as the person who's getting it in their own language? right? Because if a joke happens here, everybody should be laughing, not just the deaf person, not just the hearing person. Like everybody should get to experience that joke. And so there are so many, this is where I say that like just because you can sign doesn't mean you can interpret, because there are so many things happening at the same time. And then to get certified, you have to take a series of tests. One is currently is a written test and a performance test, where you have to, you know, it's a computerized, it's written, but it's computerized. So you're answering questions about ethics, about different scenarios, about appropriate attire. There are so many things that pop into interpreting. And then you do actual interpreting, and a panel reviews your work. And yeah, they just revamped the test right after I graduated, so I got to take the new and exciting test. But yeah.
Now, is there continuing education that goes along with this that you're required to do?
Absolutely, both for education and for interpreting. You're supposed to keep up with current trends. You're supposed to be aware of what's going on in the world. And especially, I mean, these are two professions that are people facing, right? There are some jobs that are more, I guess, mechanical, that you're sort of in front of a computer. You don't have a lot of interaction with people.
Like web developers.
Like web developer, I wasn't going to say it, but you know, but then you have these professions where you're working with students, you're working with, you know, people who are using your services. And so people change. I mean, I'm sure the web changes, of course, too. Yeah, it's changed a little bit. But, you know, when you're working with people, there's no set formula. There's no, if I put this code in, I know this is going to happen. That you have to sort of feel it out. Like sometimes, for example, I'll be interpreting for someone and I'll use a specific sign for a country or for a word, and they'll throw a different sign back at me because that's the one they're used to. Signs change, language changes. So I have to sort of adjust and go, okay, I'm going to use that sign from now on because that's the one they know. Whether it's one I agree with or whatever, it's not my job to say, no, that's not the right sign. You understand that language. That's the most important thing, is what is the message? Is the message clear? Are you getting what they're saying, or are you getting what they're signing clear enough that you understand you're getting the equivalence of if it was just two people using the same language talking to each other or signing to each other.
Now what happens when you're interpreting? And I'm thinking about times when, you know, I'm listening to something, I'm taking notes, for instance. What happens when you're trying to interpret and you say you make a mistake and then you have to correct it or something like that, or just the person speaking too fast, you're having a hard time keeping up? I don't even know if this happens. This is just kind of like in my brain. These are possibilities. Does that happen? And how do you resolve that sort of thing?
So this is the first thing that they teach you in any interpreter training program. The answer is pretty much always, it depends. It depends on the scenario. If, for example, I'm interpreting a Broadway show, I just interpreted a show at the Public last week, and if I miss something, I can't tell the actors, hey, do you mind going back? I missed that. I have to either fill it in somewhere else, or literally like stop my interpreting, go, no, let me fix that and clarify, and that's called reparation or repair. And or often if you're doing it a big event, you have a team. So there's another interpreter that's sitting there watching me, and if I miss something, they can throw it at me, and I can sort of hold it here and go, okay, let me put that in, or decide, oh no, I'm not going to put that in because I already had a plan for this. Because American Sign Language and English do not follow the same pattern. They're not in the same order. So you sort of have to sometimes wait, and there's always a little bit of a delay for you. One of the fun parts is that when somebody starts to say something, and so you talked a little bit about web development, and I was thinking along these lines, and I thought I would ask, they haven't said anything yet. They still haven't said anything for me to actually sign, right? I could say, talked about web developing, but they haven't actually asked their question. So I'm just sort of holding, right? And so then that's somewhere where somebody would be like, well, why aren't you signing yet? And I made that mistake where I had an interpreter in my classroom, And she was waiting to hear what the content, what the content was, what the context was. And I was throwing her signs, and she was like, no, 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 because I was an interpreter at that point. And she was like, she told me later, she was like, you're throwing stuff at me. I'm still waiting for them to say something. Like, what is the point of what they're saying, so that I can then put it in the right way and, give it to whoever is listening or paying attention.
That's
And
so
so I think,
fascinating. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's fine.
I was gonna say that's so fascinating because I remember being at different events, and invariably my eyes at one point are drawn to the interpreter, and I see exactly what you're describing, where it's the person speaking, but the interpreter hasn't started doing anything yet. I'm thinking like, are they thinking about the signs? Are they what are they doing? And now that makes sense. What you're saying, it makes complete sense.
Right? They haven't said anything. Don't sign yet. Nothing that you're signing is going to make any. I was thinking about, thought, what's the point, right? Um, and I find that helps me with my teaching too, and thinking about how do we translate a lot of our work, because there's a difference between translation and interpreting. Translation is we were working with like a frozen text, and we do a lot of that, of course, for our theater because we already have the script. So you have that script, and you're working on, how do we make this work in ASL? You have that time. Whereas interpreting, you don't have that time. They're talking, you got to sort of go on the fly. So that's really helped me kind of conceptualize how I approach some of my lessons, especially how I approach our theater productions. We just did Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and very fortunately for me, I had what's called a DASL. Most artistic jobs that include deaf people will have a DASL, which is a director of artistic sign language. And that's where you take the script or the music, because Joseph has no lines, it's all music. And so he was wonderful, Jules, who came in and translated all the songs, and our kids learned them from him. And then I just have to handle choreography and acting and all the other fun stuff. But I, as a hearing person, should not be doing that work. That should be a deaf person.
So
Sorry, I talk a lot.
no, that's quite okay. I want to come back to Joseph, but first I want to go back to something else that you said. So speaking with another person, and not on time we discussed, just outside of this world, and this particular person, English is their second language, and she was saying how it's very mentally exhausting, for lack of better words, to go through an entire day speaking in a language that's not your native language. Just very mentally exhausting. Do you find that at all with sign language as well, or not so much, that the muscle memory kind of does its thing and it's not? How's that for you?
As a teacher or as an interpreter?
Oh, how about either?
They're very
Either,
different
both.
animals. Teaching is different. I'm not worrying so much about, it's not as mentally taxing from a language perspective, because I'm working in I'm not working in my native language, but I feel like I've become fluent enough. I don't think I'll ever feel like I'm fluent, but fluent enough after 10 plus years to be able to communicate effectively with my students. And that is one of the things that I think helps them. They're getting direct instruction. I'm not saying that mainstream schooling is not an option. I'm not saying, I think every option works for different people. Everybody needs every person needs a different option. I do teach English, I promise. But as an interpreter, that is very taxing. And that is why you rarely see one interpreter, very rarely, for an event that's longer than half an hour to an hour. I've done an hour by myself, and it depends on what the subject matter is. If you send me into web development and you're like, you're going to interpret for an hour, no, I'm probably not your person to do that. You ask me to interpret a dissertation on Shakespeare, also still a little bit closer to my level, but like, Shakespeare's not easy either, right? So we've done Shakespeare, and that's why you usually see 2 or 3 interpreters. Or if you really want clarity, you will hire what's called a CDI, or a DI, a certified or non-certified deaf interpreter. That's where you have a deaf person who is interpreting to get real clarity of message. And there are numerous situations where that can be extremely beneficial, much better than not better than a hearing interpreter in general, just saying that fits that situation much better. And you will see them often, they'll team with a hearing interpreter who is listening to the English, signing the English to the deaf interpreter, who then interprets it into full ASL.
That's so fascinating. Okay. So they would probably take that approach as opposed to having someone who's like specialized in specific content, like someone that's like they have a strong physics background, but they also do interpretation. Like they wouldn't necessarily go to these this level of subject matter experts. It would just be more of like what you were describing.
Depending.
Really?
Depending.
Okay.
I mean, if you have a physics lecture, you're not just going to put a deaf interpreter who doesn't know anything about physics in there, right? And there's also a certain amount of prep work that comes into it. Just as there's prep work for teaching, you got to prep your lessons. You got to prep for, if I know I'm walking into a physics lesson, I'm going to study up on some physics. I'm going to learn what's the sign for physics, what's the sign for force, what's the sign for velocity, all of those. I'm going to double check all of those things. And I might check in with a deaf person and say, what do you, or my science teachers, lucky for me, I have science teachers at school that I go, what do you sign for this? And what do you sign for that? Okay, that's what we're going to use.
Jared, this is so fascinating. And you know, this is one of these areas where it's like I'm realizing just how little I know, and it's awesome. As much as I want to keep talking about this, you also are an author. I
And
believe you've written 4 books, published 4 books,
I've actually, yeah,
5 books.
5. Yeah.
So how did you get started with that? Let's switch gears and talk about your books briefly.
Sure. We're going back in time then. So around the time that I started changing careers, I also published my first book. The first 3 books go together. They're a trilogy. They're called the Star Child trilogy. And Star Child is separate. I learned afterwards that there is a Star Child trilogy where the Star Child is literally one word. Poor planning on my part. But I was actually out in Indiana at a place called Amish Acres doing theater. And it sounds so cliche, but this dream just wouldn't leave me alone. And so while I was doing shows, when I was backstage, I had a notebook and I started to write the first novel, which was Rising Sign. And it sort of grew and grew and grew. And, I was working back and forth and editing. It's definitely a first novel. It's new. It's light, but it was a lot of fun. It's basically, the premise is that if the astrological signs were born on Earth, what kind of superpower would they have? So like Libra is actually a character and Sagittarius is a character. And the fun part about that is everybody wants to know what their power is. They're like, oh, I'm a Cancer. What can I do? So yeah, so that was written back in like 2004 and published about 5 years later. I had just published my first book when I moved in with deaf roommates. So that's how I got my name sign, which is writer, but with a J. So that's why I got that. And then I published 2 more, which were Ruling House and Returning Planet. In my opinion, they're better than the first one, but you kind of got to read the first one to get to those. So the story sort of rounded out. And so that was my first 3. And then my 4th book was, it's kind of a rom-com feel about a deaf guy or a hearing guy who goes to school to become a deaf educator, go figure. It's like, write what you know, right? And we had to do this experiment in college, in grad school, where you had to put earplugs in your ears for 2 weeks in public to approximate what it feels like to lose your hearing. And I, being an overachiever, got like 2 different earplugs, plugged them up as much as I could, and basically told my friends, I'm operating as a person with hearing loss so that I can understand sort of how this works. And I just wore them all the time. And so in the book, the guy does this and he borrows his roommate's hearing aid and sort of acts deaf, which is kind of offensive. But he's trying to like understand how people treat deaf people. And he ends up meeting this guy, they start dating, and he's like, oh, I can't tell him. And so the whole time the guy thinks he's deaf, and instant hilarity ensues. And the last one, I know I see our time, so I'm like trying to speed through. Last one is called that one's called Let's Play It By Ear. And the last one is called The Outer Lands. It's very much like Alice in Wonderland, but darker, more adult, and the ending is kind of well, I won't say it, but
Jared, one thing I like to do before signing off, I like to give the person the opportunity to talk about something they believe in, a cause which they support, a project they're working on. I know you just talked about your books, but if there's anything more you want to say about any of those, the floor is yours for the next minute or two.
thanks. I mean, if people are interested in astrological fantasy or some dark themes or a rom-com, my website, I'll give you my website that you can, I guess, put in the notes. And the big thing for me is just do everything you can to make your content accessible. Not you personally, but like everyone out there, because often as a teacher, I want to share things with my students. I want them to enjoy and be aware of what's out there, and having captioning, having interpreters, just making things accessible. It may seem like the tiniest little extra step, but I think it means a lot, and it really helps them get to experience things that they might not have gotten to experience.
That's really awesome to have you say that. I'm actually toying with the idea. So you probably already know this. Global Accessibility Awareness Day is in May. It's like the middle of May somewhere. And I'm actually toying with the idea of having different accessibility awareness type videos for each of the weekends in May. I'm thinking about doing that. Jared, it's been awesome speaking with you today. Thank you for joining me on Time We Discuss.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me.
At the end of the videos, I always talk about how little I really know about a person's occupation, but Jared, he takes the cake on this one because I knew so little. If there's a profession that you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below and I'll find that person for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. That'll do it. See you next time on Time We Discuss.